going on, people? My name is Mo, your friendly neighborhood music head, here with a topic that may or may not be all over the place. I tried to think of a bunch of efficient ways trying to introduce this to you guys, but I'm at a point where I'm just like, screw it. I'm just going to hop right into my train of thought. So without further ado, let's get started. Dave East just released his new album titled Survival underneath Def Jam Recordings. Now, I've been a casual Dave East fan over the years. He always seems to have awful promo for his projects, even with how skilled of like an artist he is. So when I heard the announcement, I'm like, okay, cool, new Dave East album, right? But they had a promo video for it, and one of the last frames of the video was this. Now, this isn't his debut album. So I was wildly confused. I go to his page on Tidal, trying to see, like, am I mistaken in thinking that he has way more albums than this being his first? And I see that there's 4 projects released through Def Jam. You have Paranoia, the true story, P2, which is the sequel to Paranoia 1, Beloved with Styles P, his collab album, and now this album, Survival. And even prior to those 4 releases, he had Chiari Chanel, I think it's pronounced. That was through Mass Appeal. So he clearly has all these bodies of work, so why is Def Jam calling this his debut album? And I can maybe hear a case from Def Jam saying, oh, well, Chiari Chanel came out in 2016 on Mass Appeal Records. It wasn't under Def Jam, so it doesn't really count as an album through us. And sure, I'll let that slide. And Beloved, which came out last year with Styles P, is a collab album, so it's not a solo album. It doesn't count as a debut. I'm like, sure, like, let's pretend that those 2 arguments make sense, and we'll just focus on the other 2 projects, which are Paranoia, the True Story, and P2. So I started doing some internet digging and found out that those 2 albums that I just named, the Paranoia 1 and 2, weren't deemed albums at all. So from here on out, I'm going to be going over a lot of the semantics that labels pull when trying to release albums for artists. Let me begin by explaining that when it comes to defining what an album or an EP or a mixtape even is, there's just no consistency anymore. So because of that, it gives artists a whole lot of leeway when trying to call something a debut album, because all you gotta do is call everything prior a project, or give it a different title other than an album. For example, Chance the Rapper just released his new album, The Big Day, and it was very much publicized as his debut album, even though Coloring Book, which came out in 2017 or 16, was up for Rap Album of the Year. And, you know, it was a big deal that, oh, Coloring Book is a mixtape, and it's the first mixtape to ever be nominated for a Grammy or for Rap Album of the Year, let alone win it. And, you know, The Big Day was a steaming hot pile of garbage, and probably should have been called his second album, but, you know, I digress. Another instance of this is when Rich Brian was releasing his new project in 2018, and tried to make it very clear to everybody that even though it was a 14-track project, it wasn't his debut album. So he said to Complex, quote, "I'm not really calling it an album. I'm calling it a project. Just because I started it a year ago, and the plan was to come out with a 5-song EP. Well, Rich, sometimes I get hungry, and I go to the kitchen, and, you know, I intend on making a bowl of rice. Now, sometimes I get a little bit more hungry, and, you know, I start adding some meat, and some tomato sauce, and seasoning, and beans, and look at that. I just made chili. Now, even though I went in with the intention on making just a bowl of rice, I'm not going to call this thing a bowl of rice. It obviously has all the elements of what chili is. It's got beans, it's got tomato sauce, so I'm calling it a bowl of chili. So in this instance, you proceeded to make, 5 songs, came out with 14, sequenced it, promoted it as if it were an album, and you're just going to call it a project, not an album? I'm calling it what it is. It's an album. Artists, and mainly labels, simply declare if a project is a album or mixtape whenever it's advantageous to them. Going back to my issue with this Dave East rollout, his first project under Def Jam, Paranoia, a True Story, was declared an EP, even though it was 13 songs and 42 minutes long. And just the fact that it was called an EP is extremely telling to what the mindset of these industry execs were when it was being rolled out. For those who don't know, EPs are just small projects that artists put out nowadays to hold fans over. You know, they'll put 3 to 5 songs out, kind of to make the fans happy, but also see what songs are working and what direction to potentially go to for their album. So the fact that Def Jam rolled this album out as an EP Kind of shows that the execs weren't confident in the fact that it was going to sell, so they're just going to label the album an EP so it doesn't look as bad as it really is. It's also probably worth noting that the album only sold 25,000 copies first week, and for an artist like Dave, who was bubbling and his first release on Def Jam, those aren't really proud numbers for industry execs. A similar thing happened with Dave's following Def Jam release, P2. Even though the project was 15 songs and more than 50 minutes long, they declared it a commercial mixtape. Just the idea of a commercial mixtape is just stupid to me. Like, mixtapes in its current day status is, I'm going to make this body of work. I'm not going to care anything about samples. I'm just going to create what I want to create. I'm not going to have the pressure of like putting it on a label. Just going to put it out for free for my fans to enjoy. So the idea of commercializing it is literally, I'm going to take all these songs, I'm going to clear all the samples, and I'm going to release it and charge people for it. That's an album. So what gives? Why even classify it as that? But I proceeded to go down a Google rabbit hole on what the hell a commercial mixtape is and kind of found some interesting information. 2 years ago, hip-hop producers were calling out Atlantic Records for declaring albums as mixtapes as a way to avoid paying these producers their fair rates. Producer E. Dan, I hope that's how you pronounce the name, was in an interview with Complex saying how Atlantic was declaring albums as street albums or commercial mixtapes or compilation albums just as a way to avoid paying these producers their full rates. He said that Wiz Khalifa's 2016 effort, Khalifa, was declared a street album just so Atlantic can pay all of these people who were involved in the creation half of their regular rates, which is just a simply grimy approach to the music industry. High-profile producers like Sunny Digital were coming out in support of these allegations, saying that if you're going to denounce what Atlantic Records is doing, you got to keep the same energy with all the other labels doing the same practice of underpaying these producers. So as this pertains to Dave East, this is all speculation, but who's to say they didn't call those projects EPs and commercial mixtapes as a way to just pay everybody less? And I don't want that to be true. I do respect what Def Jam has done throughout all these years, but it is still definitely a possibility. Regardless of how labels are classifying these projects, I'm pretty sure I can speak for most people when I say that we don't care if it's a debut project. All we care is if it's new music. So I guess from a label perspective, I can understand I'm going to wait until this project is certain to sell well, call it the debut album, so that when you're sitting in meetings with these, sponsorship companies, you want to be able to say, yeah, my debut album sold this much and everything afterwards sold this much. So it's a definite boost when it comes to negotiations. But it can come off as you're trying to mislead fans into thinking that, oh, this project is way more important than everything else because this is the debut album, as if everything prior to it didn't really matter. And maybe I'm reading too much into that, but I think it's worth noting for people. And let me just say that this is nowhere near against Dave East. This is just a trend that I noticed with this rollout. All respects to Dave East. I hope that this album's great. I haven't listened to it yet, but it's definitely on my list for things to get to. Go out and support it. It's probably in your phone right now. If you have a streaming platform, just go out and support him. You know what I mean? But yes, hopefully you got something out of this video. I hope that I provided you with at least a bit of insight into label practices and the gimmicks that these people pull. And maybe you'll identify something in the future. But regardless, thank you for making it to the end. You agree with something I said, disagree, want more insight, I'm no expert, but let me know in the comments. I'm always here. And, follow me on Twitter and Instagram. I have links in my channel description. As I might have said before, like and subscribe. And yeah, I'll catch you guys later. Hopefully sooner than a month from now. Talk to you guys later. Peace.